Hey there, deep divers. Back again for another knowledge journey. And this one comes straight from you guys. We're tackling dopamine today.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you've sent in tons of stuff, articles, research, even like personal notes.
Yeah.
You're definitely ready to geek out on dopamine.
Absolutely.
So dopamine, right?
Yeah.
Most folks know it as the pleasure molecule, the one that makes us feel good.
There's so much more to
What
it.
is there?
It's not just about pleasure. It's really more about motivation and desire, like a signal from your brain saying, hey, this is important, go get it.
So like a delicious meal, a thrilling activity, even just checking your phone.
All that, yeah, dopamine is pushing you towards what you want.
So it's not the enjoyment itself, it's the wanting the anticipation to chase.
Exactly. Makes it powerful, but also tricky.
Oh, how so?
Well, because sometimes we crave things that aren't exactly good for us. Think junk food cravings or the urge to scroll through social media for hours.
Makes sense. Dopamine doesn't judge. It just drives us.
Exactly.
So where does this motivation molecule come from? Is there like a dopamine factory in our brains?
Sort of. You can't directly eat dopamine, but you can give your brain what it needs to make it.
And that is?
An amino acid called tyrosine.
Tyrosine.
Found in protein-rich foods like meat, dairy, nuts, and beans, so eat your protein.
Got it. But if it's made in the brain, does it just stay there?
Things get really interesting here. While dopamine is produced in the brain, it actually influences way more than just your thoughts.
No way. What else does it affect?
It's like a chemical messenger all over your body.
Really?
Influencing everything from blood pressure and kidney function to digestion and even your immune system.
Hold on. Dopamine is moonlighting in all those places. This is a multitasking molecule. Tell me more.
Well, it starts by regulating your blood flow, keeping your blood vessels relaxed, and your blood pressure in check. It's also involved in how your kidneys filter waste products, keeping your system running smoothly.
Okay.
And get this, dopamine even impacts how your body handles insulin, affecting your blood sugar and energy use.
Wow. So we're talking blood flow, waste cleanup, and energy levels. That's amazing. But back to the brain for a sec. What's it doing in its headquarters?
Yes. Back to HQ. Dopamine plays a key role in controlling movement, and this is where the link to Parkinson's disease comes in.
Right. I've heard that Parkinson's is linked to a dopamine shortage.
Exactly. There's a specific area in the brain called the substantia nigra, which produces dopamine that's vital for smooth movement and coordination.
So it doesn't produce enough dopamine.
You get the tremor, stiffness, and difficulty moving that are hallmarks of Parkinson's.
Wow.
Current treatments, like the medication LDOPA, aim to replenish that dopamine deficit, basically giving the brain what it needs to make more.
Like a dopamine boost to restore those smooth movements.
That's incredible.
But you mentioned earlier that dopamine can sometimes drive us towards things that aren't good for us.
Right. And that's because it's also a major player in the brain's reward system.
Reward system.
It's what gives you that rush of pleasure when you experience something enjoyable.
Like
a delicious meal, a social connection, even winning a video game.
Okay, yeah.
But this reward system can be hijacked, especially when it comes to addictive substances.
I see where you're going with this. Addiction.
Exactly. Drugs like cocaine and amphetamines basically flood your brain with dopamine, creating an artificial high. This overwhelms your system, tricking your brain into thinking these substances are super rewarding and crucial for survival.
Well then.
You end up with intense cravings and a drive to seek out the drug even when it's causing harm.
It's not just that the substances are pleasurable, right? It's like they mess with the dopamine system, making us want them even more.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's the complexity of addiction. It's not just willpower. It's about changes in the brain's reward circuitry, all driven by dopamine.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But kind of scary too, you know? Knowing how this system can be manipulated.
Definitely something to keep in mind. But on a more positive note, dopamine's drive to seek and find.
And it's that only a tiny fraction of our brain cells actually make dopamine, like less than 500,000 neurons.
Wow, that's a small number.
Out of billions. So it's a tiny workforce with a huge impact.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Those dopamine neurons, they're like an elite team. They send projections all over the brain. It highlights what's important to us.
So it's not about the pizza itself. It's about that craving before you take a bite.
Exactly. That craving, that wanting, that's dopamine in action. And this is where addiction comes in.
Okay, so how does addiction play into all of this?
Drugs like cocaine, they flood the brain with dopamine,
creating this artificial feeling of reward.
Yeah, your brain thinks the drug is vital for survival, so you crave it intensely.
So dopamine itself isn't bad. It's how these substances hijack the system.
Right. Dopamine's essential for survival, but it can be manipulated.
That's scary. We talked about motivation, wanting, addiction. But what about movement? Isn't dopamine involved in that too? Like with Parkinson's disease?
Absolutely. Dopamine coordinates our movements. In Parkinson's, the cells that make dopamine, they start to die off.
And that causes the tremors and stiffness.
Exactly. It's a dramatic example of what happens when this chemical messenger goes missing.
It's incredible how much one tiny chemical can impact us.
It shows how intricate and interconnected our brains are. You know, there's even research now linking dopamine and language.
Wait, dopamine and language, that's a new one. Tell me more.
It's a new area, but it's exciting. We're finding that dopamine might play a role in how we learn words, even understand sentences.
You mean like that satisfying feeling when you finally nail a grammar rule or express yourself perfectly in a new language?
That could be dopamine. It makes sense, right? Dopamine is all about reinforcement and learning.
Wow. I'm already seeing dopamine in a whole new light.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore. Dopamine and language, huh? It's pretty wild.
I know, right? It's like we're talking about this chemical that's involved in movement, pleasure, addiction, and now language.
It really shows you how complex the brain is.
So before we went on that tangent, you mentioned dopamine receptors. What are those exactly?
Oh, yeah. Those are key. They're like little docking stations on neurons. When dopamine connects with a receptor, it triggers something in the cell.
Like a key fitting into a lock.
Exactly. And there are different types of receptors, too. Some are linked to reward, others to movement, attention, even emotions like fear or anxiety.
So it's not just about how much dopamine you have, but also what receptors it's activating.
Exactly. And this is super important for developing treatments, like for Parkinson's or schizophrenia, even addiction.
So medications for those conditions, they're basically fine-tuning dopamine activity in specific parts of the brain.
You got it. It's not just about increasing or decreasing dopamine overall. It's about targeting specific receptors and pathways.
That's really precise. It's kind of like we're peeling back the layers of the brain to see how everything works.
We're definitely getting a better understanding. The brain's like a giant puzzle, and we're slowly putting the pieces together. Each new discovery, it brings us closer to understanding how our thoughts and feelings work.
Okay, so back to language. How does dopamine actually play a role in that? Does it, like, help us remember new words?
That's a good question. It probably does. You see, dopamine is involved in something called synaptic plasticity.
Oh, big word alert.
Don't worry. Basically, it's the brain's ability to change connections between neurons based on what we experience. It's how we learn and form memories.
Oh, I see. So when we learn a new word or use language well, dopamine strengthens those connections.
Exactly. It's like dopamine's giving those neurons a high five saying, "Good job. Let's make this connection stronger."
I like that image. Dopamine, the brain's language coach.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about learning new words. It might also be involved in how we process the emotions tied to language.
You mean like how a beautiful poem can make you cry?
Yeah.
Or a nasty comment can make you angry?
Exactly. Remember, dopamine is linked to the reward system, and emotions are tied to that system too.
Oh, right. So reading a great book, that triggers a dopamine release.
And on the flip side, a hurtful comment might trigger a different dopamine response, maybe signaling avoidance.
So dopamine's like our emotional guide for language. It pushes us towards the good stuff and helps us avoid the bad.
Exactly. It's fascinating, right? Language, emotion, memory, reward, they're all linked. And dopamine's right there in the middle of it all.
This is seriously mind-blowing. Dopamine is like this ultimate multitasker in the brain.
And we're still just scratching the surface. There's so much more to learn about this amazing chemical.
All right, so we've talked about how dopamine affects our movement, our motivation, even our language skills. But what does it all mean?
Right. Where does this leave us?
Like, we know it's not just about feeling good. It's about wanting, anticipation.
That's about what drives us.
Makes you wonder about the whole idea of happiness, you know?
Oh, yeah. Are we just constantly chasing that next dopamine hit? That next reward?
Is that all there is? I mean, it's a big question. Maybe too big for us to answer right now.
Definitely a question for the ages.
But it does make you think, right? Like, maybe true happiness, it's not just about chasing those external rewards.
Maybe it's about finding something deeper. A balance between those dopamine-driven desires and, well, a sense of purpose.
Yeah, like meaning in life, something like that.
And that balance, it's probably different for everyone.
But at least understanding dopamine, it gives us a bit more control.
Control over our choices, our behaviors.
It's like having a map of our own brain.
Exactly. Once you know how it works, you can start making choices that are more in line with what you really want.
So knowledge is power, especially when it comes to our own minds. Well, that about wraps up our dopamine deep dive. I'm definitely feeling a little bit smarter.
Me too.
And hopefully a little more mindful of how this amazing chemical is shaping our lives.
Absolutely.
And hey, if you're still feeling that dopamine craving for more brain-boosting content,
you know what to do.
Head over to YouTube and check out Mickytolife. They've got all sorts of cool stuff about travel, drinks, guaranteed to get your dopamine flowing.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Keep those brains curious. We'll catch you next time.